towards the end of Ois Vav, chapter 6 in the Maimer. We're on page Shin Lametes in our printout, so it's the second paragraph of chapter 6. Let's just review what we said till now, chapter 6. So, we said that when it comes to Matan Torah, to Mount Sinai, there are three players, three actors. There's God, the giver of the Torah, the Jewish people, the receiver of the Torah, and then there's the Torah itself that's being given from God to the Jewish people. We said that Matan Torah, this experience was a new experience from all three perspectives, from God, from the Jewish people, and the Torah. What was new at Mount Sinai? So he says that Anoichi, the Ten Commandments open with the word Anoichi. The Gemara says Anoichi is a Rosh Tevis, Hanon Nafshi Ksavis Yahavis. God says, I wrote my soul and gave my soul into Torah, meaning his essence. So the word Anoichi, I, that's an allusion to essence. Anoichi is not even a name; it's beyond the name. So that already is a reference to the essence. And Anoichi itself is a Rosh Tevis, an acronym for Anan Nafshi Ksavis Yahavis, that God says He puts His very essence into Torah, which wasn't there before. So that's something as it relates to God. With the Jewish people, it says that what happens at Mount Sinai, that God gives us the Torah and we take ownership over the Torah. Like it says, he brings from where it says that the Eibusha says, we talked about the Gemara about Nitzchuni Bonai, that we know that Emashgichim Babaskal, we don't pay any attention or put any stock in a heavenly voice as it relates to ruling in Torah. We're the ones who have to determine and rule on matters of Torah law. And so, even in a situation where the heavenly court or the scholars of heaven ruled one way, but since the Chachamim Chazal ruled a different way down here, that was the law. And God says, "My children, you've defeated me, right? And He says it happily. Also, it says that the Medrash says that God says, "I sold my Torah, and I was sold myself with the Torah." Yeah. So we see that. Selling myself with the Torah is the first part, about God's essence in the Torah. But this idea of Nitzchuni, that's that the Jewish people take ownership over the Torah. And that's, by the way, we'll get to a little bit later, but the Gemara says that also in Shabbos, at the end of the Sugya on Matan Torah, so the Gemara says over there that the Satan comes to God, Satan comes to Hashem, and he says, "Where's the Torah? Torah heichani, where's the Torah?" So God says, "It's not enough. I gave it to the earth. I gave it." So the Gemara describes how the Satan goes all over the place, and he's asking the seas, and he's asking the earth, and nobody has the Torah. So until he finally comes to Moshe, and Moshe says, "I don't know what you're talking about." Kind of, he's evasive. He goes back to God. Anyway, point is, God says Moshe is not lying. Moshe, you can't lie. You have the Torah. So Moshe says, the Torah is such a precious thing for you. Oh, I'm going to take credit for it. I'm going to say I have it. He was like a little uncomfortable with it. So God says, because of your humility, we're going to call it by your name. But the point is, from that story, the Satan asks, "Where's the Torah?" He comes to heaven. He's expecting to find it. He doesn't see it in heaven. Where is it? God says, "I gave it down here." Where is it? Taka by Moshe, by the Eden. That's where the Torah is. So it's no longer in heaven. It's down here. Then we said the third, with regard to the Torah itself, there's a difference in that the Torah itself impacts this world, impacts our reality. And that this is something we needed to explain a little bit more. We ran out of time towards the end as we were discussing this. When we talk about ideas or wisdom, so if you're a rational person, then in a sense, when you understand something a certain way, it kind of compels you to do it. However, ultimately, there's you and there's the idea or the rationale for certain behavior. They're two separate things. What he says here is that Torah, when the Torah tells you lo sirtzach, so when you said, as we explained, lo sirtzach, you could read it two ways. You could read it, don't kill. I'm telling you not to commit murder. But also lo sirtzach is you will not commit murder. In other words, that when God gives us the Torah, what happens is it's a statement about what the reality and the nature of reality is. That it's not just that He's asking don't kill, that I think that killing is unacceptable and therefore don't kill. He's saying, don't kill, you will not commit murder. You will not murder. That's what your very nature is. So Torah is telling you about the nature of reality. In a sense, all the, like you think about in politics, for instance, not that we're going to talk politics, But so you have different political parties and affiliations and philosophies and approaches to do things. So because you see things a certain way, so you vote a certain way. But the point is that political view is just a philosophy or an approach to how to live life, what the best way to live life and the best way to further civilization is. It's not that it doesn't tell you about what civilization is. It just gives you a philosophy of how to further civilization. And you could take it or you could leave it. You could choose to follow it or not choose to follow it. But when the Torah tells us this is life, this is the way to live your life, it's telling you about the nature of life itself. That this is life. Right? Like it says, in a sense you could say, like it says, V'charta b'chaim. Choose life. That this is life. Ultimately, it's up to us. We have a choice. So we mentioned in the footnote, when the Torah tells us you will not murder, it doesn't take away our free will. We still have the ability to choose to go against our nature. But that's exactly the point, is that when a person does something that goes against Torah, he's doing something that's against his nature. He's going against his own nature. Like we talked about the idea of like nichlas beiruach shtus. It's temporary insanity. Why? Because you're doing something that's not who you are. So this idea that Torah tells us about the very nature of reality, describes reality, seems to be more about the world, not about Torah itself. We're saying here that this is the chiddush in Torah itself. So the Rebbe explains, since the whole thing of Torah, the word Torah means Torah, a lesson, instruction. Torah is an instruction. So the fact that Torah is telling us about the reality of life, what life is, so that enhances Torah itself. When Torah was just a philosophy, as it was before Matan Torah, it was just ideas that were not rooted or weren't a description and an understanding of reality itself. So then, the fact that Torah was an instruction, it was an instruction like any other instruction, meaning that it's a suggestion. Right? You have the suggestion of capitalism and the suggestion of socialism. They're philosophies and approaches that are suggestions. You can take it or leave it. But then the Torah becomes a hira, meaning it becomes more than just a suggestion, it becomes the instruction manual. Right? Like in a sense, you could say that when you have a philosophy, so the philosophy tells you a certain thing, and if it's compelling and you're a rational person, you have no other way of seeing something, so it might force you to behave based on that philosophy. But ultimately, it's still a suggestion of something separate. But when you buy a piece of furniture with an instruction manual on how to assemble it, so the instruction manual is not suggested that this is what you do with it. It's telling you about it itself. You want to know what this thing is and how it works and how to get it to function optimally. You need to use the instruction manual. So that's what happened to Torah at Mount Sinai. Okay, so that we see the chiddush of Matan Torah in all three. Side by the Eibishter, that the Eibishter puts himself into Torah, his very essence into Torah. By the Yidden, that the Yidden now take ownership over Torah, and the Torah itself, that the Torah is telling us about life. And so therefore, but not only does it tell us about life, but it takes it to the next step, which is that it actually impacts this world as well. Something that Torah wasn't able to do before, or didn't do before, that after Mount Torah, Torah actually impacts this world. And that's what we're holding here in chapter 6, the second paragraph. So we're going to find it with regard to study of Torah, and also with regard to the impact of mitzvahs. That we see that all these things, not only is Torah telling us about reality, but also its impact on reality. So this is all to explain the third component here, the chiddush of Matan Torah as it relates to the Torah itself. So the same is true with regard to the learning of Torah of the Yidden, as he explains in the Torah. So the idea that when a Yid studies Torah, so Alter Rebbe explains in the Torah about when you're studying Elu Treifes, this is a treifa, and this is not kosher. This is kosher. So when you do that, you're by differentiating between the two, you're studying it as it is in Torah, the distinction between the good and the bad, or separating the pure from the impure, the kosher from the non-kosher. That has an effect on this world itself as well, where that even though this world is made up of a mixture of good and evil, but by us separating them in the way we study Torah, defining right from wrong and good and evil and kosher and non-kosher, we cause that to happen in this world as well, a separation between the holy and the profane. Yispardu kol pelei oven, the evildoers scatter, they separate from the holy. So we see that just by even studying Torah and studying the distinction between kosher and non-kosher, we cause a separation between the kosher and non-kosher forces and elements in this world. And this is this is similar to the effect that happened when God speaks the Ten Commandments at Mount Sinai. So we see this relates to the third thing, the effect in Torah itself, and the effect in Torah itself is similar to the third interpretation of Lamer, where we said that Lamer is the idea that it impacts the world. So too here we see that when we study Torah, that the Torah has an effect on the world. This impact happens in a sense, in a spiritual sense. When we study Torah, the fact that we're separating from good and evil and disconnecting them in a sense, and in reality, that's sort of more abstract, or it happens in a spiritual sense. But the Rebbe adds, but this is even more evidence when we talk about mitzvahs. So we can add that this impact of Torah, the change within Torah, that Torah impacts the world, is not only the fact that Torah itself is telling us about reality, and since Torah is bin lashon hara, so that enhances the very Torah itself. Furthermore, when a person studies Torah, it has an impact, a spiritual impact on the world. But this is true even more when we talk about the mitzvahs in Torah. Through fulfilling mitzvahs. After Mountain Torah, what we do is we actually elevate and refine the physical thing with which the mitzvah is performed. To the extent that in some cases the physical thing becomes a holy object, a mitzvah object, even a holy thing. So the different levels. You have the hechsher mitzvah, you have the chetz of the mitzvah, chetz of kedusha, things that have different levels of holiness that are invested within it. Right? So you have, let's say, a Torah and tefillin, a chetz shel kedusha. You have a lulav, would be a chetz shel mitzvah. Then you have things that are merely a hechsher mitzvah. So there are different levels of holiness. Either way, we know that we have to treat them in different ways. So you have to treat a Sefer Torah one way, you have to treat the lulav another way, you have to treat the sukkah walls another way. They have to be treated with an element of respect, even though it's not, even things that aren't holy, it becomes a chetz shel mitzvah, or in some, it has some kind of holiness invested in it. You have to treat it in a different way, because the physical thing becomes invested with holiness. So we see that the Chiddush of Matan Torah happens in all three things. With regard to the Eibishter himself puts his essence into Torah. That's something new that happens on Mount Sinai as it relates to God. But as it relates to the Jewish people, that the Jewish people become owners, take ownership over Torah. The Torah now is theirs, is in their domain. And also Torah itself, the Torah impacts reality in a way that it didn't before Mount Sinai. Okay, chapter 7. This is what the Medrash says on the pasuk. The pasuk says in Shir Hashirim, right in the beginning, that the reich shmanach tovim, your oils make a good fragrance, or a good scent. And shemen turak shmecha, your name is flowing oil. It's poetic, trying to describe the attraction and the beauty of the beloved of the author of Shir Hashirim. So he says that your scent is a fine oil, and your very name is flowing oil. What does this mean? So the Medrash says like this, because obviously we know that all of Shir Hashirim is a metaphor for the relationship between God and the Jewish people. So the Medrash explains like this: Kol hashirim she'amru lufanecha avos reichos hayu. All the songs that our patriarchs said before you are like scent. Reichos hayu. They were like a scent. Avol anu, but we shemen turak shmecha. We, meaning us, post Mount Sinai, is shemen turak shmecha. Our name is flowing oil. What does that mean? Your name is flowing oil. That ka'adam shemayrik mikeli lekeli, like a person who empties from one vessel to another vessel. Kol ha-mitzvah sha'asul the Medrash continues, ha'aveis reichos hayu. All of the commandments that our patriarchs fulfilled, observed before you, are like reichos, are like a scent. Aval anu shemen turak shmecha. But we, shemen turak shmecha, we are oil, flowing oil is our name. The real thing. So what does this mean? So what's the Medrash saying here? The pasuk says l'reach shemanecha tovim shemen turak shmecha. There's an Indian of reach shemanecha tovim. There's the idea of scent, the good scent of oil. That's the first part of the verse, and the second part of the verse is shemen turak shmecha. Your name is flowing oil. So the Medrash basically saying, Chazal are telling us that we're talking about two stages. When we say that l'reach shemanecha tovim, that we compare the Jew, the beloved, to the scent of good oil, the fine oil, that scent of fine oil, that's the patriarchs, the Aves. But when we say Shemen Turak Shmecha, you are flowing oil, that's talking about us after Mount Sinai. How does that work? So the Medrash explains that the Aves, the Shirim that they said before, and what is Shirim? Let's take a look. What's the meaning of Shirim? The songs. Also, it says Shirim should say that they sang. It says the Shirim that they said. What does that mean, the Shirim? So he says in note 54, Shirim Hu Torah. When we say the Shirim that the patriarch sang, what we're talking about is the Torah that they studied. K'maimer Azalik, the Gemara says, Kol Ha'isik B'Torah, B'Layla Chulu Shenemar, V'Layla Shirim Imi. That the verse, the Gemara wants to bring an idea about talk about the value of studying Torah at night, and it brings a proof of the idea of studying Torah at night from the pasuk Balayla Shira Imi, that the Shira, the song, meaning the Torah, is with me. The David HaMelech says that that I study Torah at night. So we see Torah is referred to as Shira. So when we say that the sages, all the songs of the patriarchs, meaning all the Torah they studied, that's all reiches. That's like a scent. But we are the real thing. Shemen Turak Shmecha. What does Shemen Turak Shmecha mean? That we are flowing oil flows. So the Medrash explains. Like a person who empties from one vessel to another vessel. Right? One who takes from one vessel and pours it out of one and into the other. And all the mitzvahs that the patriarchs performed, also reichas, also sent. But we, Shemen Turak Shmecha, with us it's the oil itself. Not the scent of the oil, but the oil itself. The flowing oil itself. What does this mean? So he says like this, Shleimar. You could say, by the way, this Maimer Chazal, this Medrash, is often quoted in Chassidus. I mean, the commentaries on the Medrash explain it slightly differently, but in Chassidus, this is discussed a lot as the explanation on the difference between pre-Mount Sinai and post-Mount Sinai. It's a very important Medrash. So the Rebbe is going to explain here in detail how this Medrash incorporates all three components, all three aspects that we're talking about are alluded to in this Medrash. He says like this, this Medrash tells us all three things, the Chiddush of Matan Torah in all three aspects, as we discussed in chapter 6. The difference between the oil and the scent of oil in itself is and that is that alludes to the difference in mitzvahs and in mitzvahs as it relates, or Torah and mitzvahs as it relates to the one who gave the mitzvahs. When you have oil and the scent of oil, so oil itself is the real thing. The scent is only a scent. It's not the thing itself. It's an effusion of the thing, but it's not the thing itself. So when we say that the patriarchs, when they're studying Torah, what were they studying? The reach. They only got the scent of Torah, the effusion of Torah. But with us, it's the real thing. It's the oil itself. This relates to the Chiddush of Matan Torah as it relates to the Eibush of the Mitzvah HaMitzvahs. Why? Because that Torah, because Torah itself, as it is on its own, what is Torah? Torah is Chachma of the Eibush. Chachma of the Eibush, that's only an effusion. It's only an expression, an extension of the Eibush's essence. It's not the essence itself. When do we have the true ideal of God and the Torah are one? That happens at Mount Sinai. That's when the Torah is infused with the oil itself. The same is true with regard to mitzvahs, that with Matan Torah, the essence of the Eibush is put into the mitzvah. What does this mean here? We've talked about this idea many times, the idea that when we talk about the individual, there's the essence, then you have outside of the essence, what's an expression of the essence is the will, and then below that you have the koiches hapnimim, you have the intellect, the emotions. So when you talk about your intellect, a person's intellect, that's not your essence. It's very close to your essence, but it's not the essence itself. The intellect is koiches pnimim for sure, but it's not the essence. Your essence is beyond that. When you talk about your will, we're getting already closer to the essence. But even your will is your essence as it's expressed in something else. As we talked about actually also a lot in the last Maimer, a little bit from a different angle. Then there's the essence itself that's not definable, describable. The very essence. So when we talk about the Eibush, when we talk about Torah as being Chachmasei Shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Torah is the wisdom of the Holy One, blessed be He. So if it's the wisdom, so if it's His wisdom, then it's not Himself, it's not the essence. So that's why the Torah that the patriarch studied is compared to reach, the scent of oil. Scent is not the thing itself, it's an expression of the thing. But it's not the thing, it's not the oil, it's only an effusion, an expression of it. So when the patriarchs studied Torah, what were they studying? They're studying the Chachma of the Eibishter. True, it's the Chachma of the Eibishter, but it's compared to Reach, to scent, because it doesn't contain within it the essence of the Eibishter. And the Rebbe says over here, it doesn't say that Yisrael Reis HaKodesh Kol Echad happens about Torah. He says the amitis inyan, because the truth is, right off the bat, the first thing comes to mind. Perik Beis and Tanya, the Alter Rebbe talks about the nefesh hashenis miYisrael chelek elakam b'ma'amah, which is part of God. Why is the soul a part of God? Because it comes from Chachmasei of the Eibishter. And the Alter Rebbe explains over there, Huva Chachmasei Echad, right? That Hu Amada Hu Yedea, the Eibishter is one with his Chachma. So if he's one with his Chachma, so I get that if you're saying it's Chachma of the Eibishter, the Chachma is an extension. But the Chachma of the Eibishter is one with the Eibishter. It's one with him. So what exactly does it mean? So he doesn't really explain it. He doesn't go to detail. He just says that Amitis. So that's true even before. If it was the Eibishter's Chachma, he's not separate from his Chachma. He's one with his Chachma. Nevertheless, he doesn't really explain. He just says the Amitis inyan de'Reis HaKodesh Baruch Hu Kol Echad happens at Matan Torah. Maybe. I mean, he doesn't say Begil. He just says the Amitis inyan, that it truly happens. Maybe it's related to something he's going to say later. Maybe we'll come back to this later. I'm not sure. But the point is that, nevertheless, still, it's on some level, maybe it was before, but ultimately the true, I get, you can maybe look at it the other way. Since Huva Chachmasei Echad, since the Eibush is one with his Chachma, so when it's his Chachma, so it relates back to his essence. But that's only because the Chachma is relating back to the essence of the Eibush, because it's not separate from him. But what happens at Matan Torah is, Anon Nafshi Ksavas Yavas, he puts his essence into the Torah. It goes in the other direction. So Huva Chachmasei Echad, you could say, maybe, I don't know, you could say that it's just, since there's nothing, it's not separate from him, it's not apart from him, so therefore it's his essence. But it's not that he invests his essence into it, it doesn't exist outside of his essence. But at Matan Torah, what happens, Ksavis Yavas, he puts himself into it. That's the ultimate oneness or the essence of the Eibush that appears in Torah. So this aspect, the Chiddush of Matan Torah as it relates to the Eibusher, that the Eibusher puts his essence in Torah, is expressed in this idea that the patriarch study of Torah is compared the Shirim Shamru L'Fanachas Reichos. That's Reach. It's only an infusion of it. It's not the essence of the Eibusher. It's only the Chachma of the Eibusher. But Anu Shemen Torah Shmecha, with us we get the oil itself. The flowing oil itself, that's what we have when we study Torah. We have the essence of the Eibishter. And the same is true, he concludes with mitzvahs, because the Medrash continues that with regard to mitzvahs, the patriarch's performance of mitzvahs is reichos, also doesn't have the essence, but anu shemen torah shmecha, we have the essence. Okay. So that's one thing that's alluded to in this Medrash. Another thing, another difference between the scent of the oil and the oil itself is when you smell oil, so you're not taking anything, the oil doesn't lessen, doesn't decrease. But when you take the oil itself, what happens? Shemen turak shmecha, flowing oil, meaning kadam shemayrik mikei, like a person flowing or pouring oil. Also, when the Medrash says shemayrik mikei lekei, means to pour out from one to another. So what happens when I'm pouring the oil? It's not just actual oil that can be poured, pourable oil, but you're actually pouring the oil, meaning that you're emptying one vessel and putting it into another. So what happens when you take oil from one and pour it into another? You're now lacking oil in the first vessel. So about Nimshal, what is this in the Nimshal? Shalidain, since the Torah Lamata, by the Eibusher giving us the Torah down here, Nito Mehal Yoinim Akayach Livsagdin. It was the capacity to rule was taken away from the heavenly courts. The Torah loy b'shamayim. Torah is no longer in heaven. Obviously, they study Torah in heaven. So, what does the verse say? That when we say loy b'shamayim, it's not in heaven. What does that mean? That heaven doesn't have authority over it at all anymore. It had the authority, no longer doesn't have the authority. So it's lacking up there. So we see this idea of when we say compare the oil to the scent of oil. When we're talking about the scent of oil, you don't have the oil itself. So here, what happens when we say that now after Matan Torah is we have the oil, the ka'adam shemayrik mikeli lekeli, a person who's emptying from one to the other. That what happened at Mount Sinai? The second thing we mentioned, which is that God takes the Torah from heaven and gives it to us, transfers it to us, that it's no longer in heaven. Like we mentioned before about the Gemara where the Satan says, Torah heichani. What do you mean heichani? Why shouldn't he find Torah up in heaven? It's also a chiddush. You think about it. Torah's ideas, if it's chachma, it's wisdom, so you say it's not there, it should be everywhere. And yet Torah is not he's not finding it up there. What does it mean he's not finding it up there? Because the ownership of Torah, this capacity of being able to rule in Torah, is no longer in heaven. You can't find it there. It's down here. It's lacking from there. It was taken away from there and brought and given to us down here. So that's the second thing, where we see that the second thing, the chiddush of Torah as it relates to Eden, that God takes it from heaven and gives it to us, that we become owners of it, as it were. Another difference between scent and oil is the hareach hu heilig v'kala. Scent dissipates until there's nothing left of it. And also the pleasure that a person has from smelling something, a fine fragrance, that you only enjoy it as long as you're smelling it. Whereas food or the oil, even after the food is digested, it still remains intact. It's just that it changes form. It goes from being the food to now becoming part of your flesh and blood. And not only does it remain, and not only is it that after it remains, it becomes part of you, but it actually impacts the person. The food itself. We'll get to the oil in a second. We'll get back to that. What is this in the nimshal? That the Torah and mitzvahs that the sages, that the patriarchs engaged in the study and the performance wasn't invested in the world in a pnimius. But through studying Torah after Mountain Torah, after Hashem gives it to us, so through studying Torah, we mentioned before, remember the two paragraphs at the end of chapter 6. The first thing about learning Torah, when we study Torah, it impacts, but even more so when we do the mitzvahs. Same thing Rebbe is concluding over here. Through our study of Torah, and certainly through our performance of mitzvahs, it affects the world in a pnimius and in a permanent way. So number one, it affects it, he says, b'pnimius. It affects it internally. That's like what we said before, that the food affects you in a way that it transforms the person. A person behaves in a way that relates to the food. We'll get to in a moment the footnote, further clarification. And also kvias, it remains. It doesn't go away. It becomes part of you. So that always remains. So that's the idea of pnimius and kvias. Pnimius, that it's transformative, and kvias, that it remains, it doesn't dissipate. Whereas the mitzvahs, or the Torah that were studied by the patriarchs, that's reich, that was sent dissipates, it doesn't stay, so it doesn't affect the world or the person in any kind of a permanent or personal transformative way. But after Matan Torah, what do we have? Shemen, we have the food, and what happens with food? Food becomes part of you, it remains permanently part of you, and also is transformative, it changes the person, it influences the person. In a practical sense, it influences the person. It depends what kind of food you eat. The healthier the food, the healthier the body. The less healthy the food, the less healthy the body, right? But it also means even in a different way, as he mentions here inside, the tchunis ha'meichel, that the characteristics, which we'll get into in the footnotes. So let's go back and look at the footnotes here, and then we'll close up chapter 7 and move on. Okay. Note 57. When he says, we said Torah is not in heaven. Torah was taken away from heaven and given down here, right? So the Rebbe explains, if you look at the Medrash, which we quoted almost in its entirety, we quoted the Medrash, that when it says that the Shirim, when we talk about the Torah that the patriarch studied, we say, we give an exact explanation, like a person who empties from one vessel to another. But by the mitzvahs, it doesn't say ka'adam shemerik. It just says the mitzvahs that the patriarchs performed, and the ones we do, shemen turuk shmecha. It doesn't say like one who empties from one to the other. So Rebbe explains, 57, this explains why the explanation of one person emptying, taking it from one place and putting it in another place is mentioned specifically in the context of study of Torah. It's the Torah itself that is removed from heaven and given down here. It's loy b'shamayim. Mitzvahs, you can't really say this. Mitzvahs are part of Torah, already included in that, and you can't really say they had the performance of mitzvahs up there. That idea that when we say that the Torah was given over to us, that's pronounced in the idea that it's taken from heaven and given to us. So that's why that idea of one person emptying one vessel to the other applies when we're talking about Torah. It's not really applicable when he's describing the distinction between the patriarchs before Mountain Torah and after Mountain Torah with regard to mitzvahs. Okay, 58. We said that with regard to scent, the scent dissipates, and after a person is no longer smelling it, he doesn't have the pleasure from it. So he says, note 58, that this is even true, and if we talk about it let's say scientifically, but we mean halachically, the science of life. Halachically, note 58, that's why the halach is, the Magen Avraham explains, why is it that we don't make a bracha? You have to make a bracha before you smell, right? To smell something, take pleasure in a scent. It's a pleasure, it's a birchas, you have to make a birchas hanenin. You're deriving pleasure, you make a bracha before, and we do by Havdalah, but you don't make a bracha achrayna on smell. Why do you make a bracha achrayna? A concluding bracha? Because when you're not smelling it anymore, it's no longer there. Whereas when you eat, after you finished eating, you're now satisfied. The food's still there. You have to make a concluding blessing. But once the smell is gone, there's no more pleasure. There's no reason for a bracha achrayna. Okay, note 59. He says, whereas food or oil, after it's digested, it still remains. So you mentioned about is oil food. So really, there's a good question, because we know the halacha is that you don't make a bracha. If you wanted to just eat oil straight, you don't make a bracha on oil. Why? Because oil is harmful for the body. Yeah. So I mean, here we're calling it food, but also that's why you look inside. Already, the Rebbe is sort of tipping us off. Is sensitive to it, because he says whereas food, and in parentheses he says oil. He doesn't say. He's talking about, because the main point we want to make here is about food specifically, not oil, or food generally, not oil specifically. We're talking the medrash about oil, but we're talking about oil. So he addressed it. Note 59. That oil she'efshar la'achle impas elishtaisa yadeshim arvin reisa b'shar mashkin. Oil, it could be considered classified a food in that you could eat it with food. You'd either use it as a dipping for bread, or you can obviously dress a salad with it. I mean, you can put oil in anything to make it taste better, or you mix it with other liquids, other drinks, to be able to drink it on its own. Note that even when you drink oil by itself, and in which case we don't consider it food necessarily, which at that point it's harmful to a person. The fact that it's harmful means that you're ingesting it. So in other words, what's he saying? Whether we're going to classify it as a food on its own or not, first of all, you could say it's food because you mix it with food and you eat it. So you do eat oil. But even if you're saying that oil is harmful, okay, it's not poison, even poison in a sense. With regard to, what are we talking about? What's the point we're trying to bring in about the oil here? That you can eat it and it becomes part of you. So are you going to say that oil is harmful? That proves the point. The fact that it's harmful means that it's doing exactly what it needs to. That's why the Rebbe puts the oil in brackets here, because the main point here is that it becomes part of you and it impacts the person. It remains and becomes a part of the person and influences the person. That's true even with regard to oil, as it's not necessarily a food specifically, as it could be harmful. That point is still brought across clearly. Okay, note 60. That has to do with the tchun of oil. That has nothing to do with regard to food. It still becomes part of the person. Yeah, the fact that it separates, but it's still, it means you flavor it, you have to put other things in it. So yeah, even though it separates, but it's still, you can still mix it and dilute it with other liquids. Okay, note 60, he says about the food, he's making 2 points about food going in. One point is that it remains, it stays, and the other point is that it becomes part of you. Right? So the fact that it still remains, the fact that it remains is that it becomes part of you, and the fact that it has an impact, it's transformative in a sense. The idea that it remains is that the food that you eat becomes part of Damo Basar B'Sarei. Literally, it becomes part of your body. Right? You don't need any further elaboration. And the other point that it has a transformative effect. So we're saying that it becomes that a person behaves in accordance. So he notes 60 that the Ramban says there are many reasons that are given for kosher. We know that kosher in its very essence is a chayk. It's a mysterious law. It's one that is beyond rationale. Nevertheless, the sages always try to discuss, since we try to also understand it, and we discussed in other Mamorim why we're actually called upon, we discussed it at length in Ki Yishalcha Bincha, to try and understand even rationally, even the non-rational mitzvahs. But at its core, kosher are non-rational mitzvahs. Nevertheless, we attempt to understand it rationally. So there are different reasons given to the benefits of kosher. One of them, the Ramban says, is that you see that when it comes to kosher, you can detect a pattern, which is that all animals of prey are not kosher. Animals that eat other animals are not kosher animals. Only herbivores are kosher, right? Not any, but not carnivores. Herbivores, I think it's there, right? animals that eat other animals that prey on other animals are not kosher. Why? So the Ramban says because when you eat the animal, it becomes part of you. And so if you eat an aggressive animal, a violent animal, so you'll become violent and aggressive. So therefore we eat animals that are calm, right? Tame animals, not only domesticated that are kosher, but more calm animals. Those are the animals we eat because it becomes a part. It impacts who you are. Okay. We said that last five. Well, how are we doing on time? We have a few minutes. 9:10. Let's look at note 61 then quickly. He's saying that before Matan Torah it wasn't invested and it wasn't bepnimius. He says note 61. Re'elu kutzichas chelekei 395. Ve'elach shegam mitzvahs da avis polu b'miktzas b'dvar magashmim shebehem naso mitzvahs gam la'achrei kiyum mitzvah. Kivin shemaysav v'simen v'nisin kech labanim behechrich sheyeh behem eze dugma al kol panim la'mitzvah shalachim Matan Torah. So we say this idea of that a mitzvah, if it has a lasting effect and it becomes transformative, that happens after Matan Torah. So the Rebbe says, note, the Ramban actually also talks about the idea of Maisa Avasim Labanim, that the adventures of the patriarchs are a sign for their children. What does that mean? That whatever happened to the Avis, the patriarchs, whatever we read in Chumash Bereshis that happened to our patriarchs is something foretelling what's going to happen with us. We're going to relive the same thing, and they, by living it before us, pave the way for us. So Ramban explains it's not just that what they did is like an omen or a sign of what's to come, but them living through it actually enables us to go through the same thing. Through the patriarchs experiencing it, the Avis experiencing what they experienced, we have the ability, we're invested with the koyach to be able to go through the same thing and carry it out. So if that's the case, so the same has to be said about the mitzvahs that they did. How is it that we can impact the world through our performance of mitzvahs? It must be that the patriarchs also were able to do it. So without getting into it, because we're out of time, the Rebbe is saying that it did exist on some level with the patriarchs before Matan Torah, but not to the extent of after Matan Torah. Let's leave the rest for later.